Representative Allemand.
Present.
Representative Angelos.
Here.
Representative Harrelson.
Excused.
Representative Pendergraft.
Here.
Representative Sherwood.
Excused.
Representative Smith.
Here.
Chairman Bear.
Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you. We'll begin on House Bill 274 as a re-referral. Chairman Rodriguez-Williams, would you please come forward and just give us a brief description of the bill? And you can go in a little bit more depth on the appropriation that we're going to be dealing with in this committee. And to everyone else here, welcome to Appropriations. We appreciate seeing the chairs start to fill up here. And go ahead, Chairman Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the Appropriations Committee. I am the prime sponsor of House Bill 274, titled Biological Males in Women's Sports. As you know, this bill has been re-referred to you. Essentially, what this bill does is it creates a level playing field for women in higher education, specifically our community colleges and our sole land-grant university. There is a fiscal note attached to this bill, which is why I come before you today, with a non-administrative impact. I will briefly explain it to you. There is an anticipated decrease in the general fund, which covers 3 years, 26, 27, and 28, a $50,000 decrease. The bill repeals the School Activity Eligibility Commission. Going into the assumptions under the fiscal note, the School Activity Eligibility Commission would be repealed effective July 1st, 2025, and no longer require the clerical or administrative support from the Wyoming Department of Education, and members of the School Activity Eligibility Commission would not receive per diem. The Department of Education estimates a general fund expenditure decrease of $50,000 each fiscal year related to the costs associated with the School Activity Eligibility Commission. The bill also expands a prohibition of males competing in athletic activity designated for females to grades kindergarten through 6 in institutions of higher education. Our university indicates there's no fiscal or personnel impact, and the same with the Wyoming Community College Commission. And I would stand for any questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you for that brief description. And thank you for bringing a reduction in general fund spending. Any questions for the chairman? Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Representative, for being with us today. Can you talk to me about the work of the School Activity Eligibility Commission and whether or not you considered expanding their duties in the way that this bill goes to kindergarten, so now it's K through 12, and sort of the pros and cons of that, and then did you consider expanding their duties to the collegiate level as well? Thank you.
Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, this bill passed Labor and Health Committee, and believe it or not, the commission really wasn't debated very heavily by the committee, or the committee didn't receive much feedback or input from testimony that we heard as well. So the repealing of it and their duties, I would say, wasn't heavily focused on in committee during the committee meeting. I support the repealing. I continue to support it, and the decrease that comes before you today.
Follow up, go ahead, Representative Sherwood.
Thank you. So now, as it works now, if I'm a concerned parent, and there is an allegation, made of unfairness, the process can go through the School Activity Commission. But now, if we repeal that, is my only recourse then to go to court and to sue?
Representative Rodriguez-Williams.
Thank you, Chairman Bear, members of the committee, for the question. So yes, the commission would be repealed, obviously. And much like any other law that's in that, or any statute that's in place, yes, we do have lawbreakers. My hope is that our athletes do follow the law and we don't have any lawbreakers. But yes, the course of action would be as such, as you described.
Further questions for the bringer? Seeing none, we thank you for presenting and assume this, this bill will pass this committee as far as its ability to see the floor, and you'll be managing this bill? Is that correct?
Mr. Chairman and members, yes.
Okay, thank you. So let's go ahead and open this up to the public. First of all, do I have any agencies here who wish to speak on this? All right. Do I have any legislators here? I don't see any. Any other elected officials here? None. All right. And we have someone online, do we not, Mr. Childress?
Mr. Chairman, he is not online right now.
Not online
Not.
at this time? Okay, so let's open it up to the public. Can I see a raise of hands at how many in the public, just general public, are wanting to speak on this? One? Okay, ma'am, if you could come forward, we'll give you a few minutes here to opine on this bill. Please state your name and let us know where you stand on this bill. If you represent someone, it looks like you have a name tag on. So since she's up here, if there are other agencies or associations that want to speak, you can go ahead and come on up and grab a chair. Okay, go ahead, ma'am.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, representatives. My name is Patricia McCoy, and I am a representative of Moms for Liberty of Laramie County. I'm here today to speak in support of House Bill 274, which strengthens and clarifies Wyoming's commitment to protecting fair athletic competition in our educational institutions. This bill accomplishes several crucial objectives. First, it sends existing protections to both K-6 education and our higher education institutions, ensuring comprehensive coverage across all levels of education in Wyoming. The amendment's addition of clear scientifically based definitions of male and female provides much needed clarity for implementation and enforcement, reducing potential confusion or misinterpretation. Importantly, this legislation works in harmony with House Bill 60, creating a robust and comprehensive framework for protecting female athletes, while House Bill 274 establishes strong foundational protections. House Bill 60 complements these protections by extending coverage to K through 12 and providing additional safeguards against false accusations. Together, these bills create a clear, consistent, and enforceable standard across all levels of education in Wyoming. From a fiscal perspective, this bill actually generates savings for the Wyoming taxpayers, which who doesn't love savings, right? The fiscal note indicates a $50,000 annual reduction in general fund expenditures by eliminating the School Activity Eligibility Commission. The bill's clear definitions and strong legal framework, combined with the $50,000 annual savings from streamlining administrative processes, demonstrates good stewardship of taxpayer resources while providing clear guidance to our educational institutions. This legislation also provides robust protections for those who uphold these standards. It creates meaningful whistleblower protections for employees and shields schools from retaliation for maintaining separate female sports teams. It establishes clear legal remedies, including private causes of action for both students and schools who suffer from harmful violations. This is fundamentally about protecting athletic opportunities that generations of women have fought to secure. The university and our community colleges have indicated minimal fiscal impact from implementation, showing this is a practical solution we can implement without significant burden to our educational institutions. And I urge this committee to support House Bill 274, and I'll take any
All
questions.
right, thank you, Ms. McCoy. Any questions for Ms. McCoy? All right, seeing none, thank you very much.
Thank you,
Do I have
sir.
anyone else here that would like to give us public comment on the bill? All right, seeing none. One last time, Ms. Childress, have we got Mr. Malia online yet?
No, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, we're going to close public comment. And committee, what's your pleasure? Move to pass. Move to pass, seconded by Representative Angelos. All right, discussion on the bill, starting on page 1. Page 2. Page 3. page 4. Page 5, Representative Sherwood.
Thank you, committee. I guess I am kind of stuck on this repeal of the school activity commission, just because I think that it is a low-cost option for the taxpayer to have an opportunity before a lawsuit is filed, which just feels really aggressive. I feel like the Activity Commission has worked for us now for many years to provide fairness and safety in our sports. And I think that I will make an amendment on page 5, line 6, to delete this commission, to delete these lines here on 5 and 6, to preserve the School Activity Commission as an opportunity for parents and athletes before the courts.
All right, you've heard the motion. Do I have a second? All right, failure on second, that amendment fails. Any further discussion on page 5? Okay, any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, I'm going to make a comment here. One of the things that I think this bill does very well that the previous bill did not, that passed in the past, was setting up this particular commission to be an arbiter, basically stating that if this didn't meet legal muster, that we would do this process. And so I don't think it's appropriate for the legislature to pass bills admitting defeat before we even get there. I think it sends the wrong signal to the courts. I think this correction, I appreciate the bringer of the bill correcting that and creating a process so that the people that may be affected are going to be protected or have an ability to do that. So do appreciate that, and on and for the bill. Any further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, Ms. Childress, would you please take the roll?
Roll call vote, House Bill 274 do pass. Representative Allemand? Aye. Representative Angelos? Aye. Representative Haroldson? Aye. Representative Pendergraft?
Aye.
Representative Sherwood? No. Representative Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Bear?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, 6 aye, 1 no.
All right, that does pass, and Representative Rodriguez-William will manage that on the floor. Thank you for presenting as well. All right, moving on to House Bill 101. Do we have anybody from the agency here to present this bill to us? Thank you. Please come forward. Appreciate the help with this. Please state your name and your agency, and we'll get this going.
Okay, good afternoon, Chairman Bear, committee members. My name is Kelly Norris, and I'm the Wyoming State Forester. This is the first time this bill has been introduced to a committee. So just so you're aware of that as well. We haven't. So do you need to go through the whole bill, or?
No, you
Okay.
can just give us a general overview, and if there's questions, you can dive into that based on questions. That would be sufficient.
Okay. So this is the Forest Health Grant Program bill, and really it's to administer by the state forester, as the bill says, to establish an application process and any other requirements of the grant program not otherwise provided. And it's a cost share program, 75% cost share, and within that, the following requirements is these projects: 1, enhance water yield or quality; 2, reduction of the risk of catastrophic wildfire damage; 3, increase production of forest products; 4, improvement of habitat conditions for wildlife and livestock. And then lastly, any other project that is beneficial to forest health, that is substantially beneficial to the interest of the state, and that has the public purpose as determined by the state forester. With this is funding project work that is on non-federal lands. It'll be on all state lands and public lands that are non-federal. So with that, I will kind of go into, and there is a sunset date, I do want to note on that, and the state forester will need to annually report to the Joint Agriculture, State and Public Lands and Water Resource Interim Committee every year of all the grant awards under this section of this grant. And There is, I think the last page says where the sunset date is, and the appropriation is $3 million from the general fund to the Forest Health Grant Program for the purposes of implementing this act and making grants authorized by this act. And the sunset date is, I believe, 2029. Okay, with that, I just want to give the committee a little background. Wyoming is considered a headwater state, meaning our forests hold headwaters to the Colorado, the Missouri, and the Columbia rivers, as well as the Great Salt Lake. Protecting and restoring the source of water, specifically managing our biggest reservoir, a snowpack, is increasingly urgent priority for Wyoming citizens, agriculture, wildlife, and recreation. Just like our federal forests need to be managed to reduce wildfire impacts and effects, so does Wyoming's 2.5 million acres of state and private forested lands. Last October, the Elk Fire burned over 98,000 acres across municipal watersheds for the Sheridan area, as well as Dayton and Manchester. Estimated costs for the suppression efforts are $55 million, but the long-term costs and impacts for the municipal water, the irrigators, the ranchers, wildlife, and recreation are yet to be known. The top priority for protection during the Elk Fire was the municipal water facilities. This is because Sheridan, the sixth largest city in Wyoming, has no backup water source for water that comes off the Bighorn Mountains and has only one municipal water facility, and that municipal water is treated and piped through. The active forest management that was completed on state trust lands became a significant means to stop the Elk Fire. As the fire came barreling up out of Tongue River Canyon, the fire burned into state forestry's past harvest units and a large aspen enhancement project that was completed in coordination with Wyoming Game and Fish on state and federal lands. This is where the fire stopped and saved 3 state-leased cabins. It saved wildlife habitat and essential grasslands for grazing operations. The management that was completed on state lands, it resulted in lower suppression costs because there was no need to order multiple air tankers. There was no need to bring in heavy equipment to get around those cabins to save them and those lands. If only the rest of the forest had the same management treatments, and the suppression costs and impacts would have been greatly lessened. State forestry has implemented project work similar to this in proposed bills years ago. Wyoming legislature invested in forest management to help with the mountain pine beetle epidemic in the Black Hills, and funding was also used on lands in the Bighorns and Laramie Range to combat the western spruce budworm outbreaks. Those funds were placed in the emergency fire suppression account. This bill will create an account separate from the emergency fire suppression account and keeps fire suppression costs separate and active forest management in a different account. When federal funding is available and awarded to state forestry, we implement a cost share program similar to what's in this proposed bill and expect to implement this program without needing to increase any staffing. The funds we receive from the U.S. Forest Service are typically competitive grants, and they focus on practices and lands that the funds can be used on and their federal priorities rather than Wyoming's priorities. For state trust lands, state forestry can and have used state trust land preservation enhancement limited funds, which is only available on state trust lands. This bill will cover all state lands. So this is state park lands like Keyhole, Kirkgowdy, Glendo. This can be used on game and fish lands. This can be used on Wyoming military lands. And it's focusing on Wyoming's priorities on those lands. The funding from the proposed Forest Health Grant Program will be available to be leveraged to access additional funds and can help alleviate the dependency of federal funds for this type of project work. Further, this cost share funding would significantly enhance the implementation of essential on-the-ground projects addressing forest health and wildfire risk concerns. It will allow for more effective cross-boundary projects that will increase forest health impacts at a larger scale to Wyoming's watersheds and communities. For example, this funding is flexible enough that it can solve this consistent challenge we have of finding different funding sources for each jurisdiction and land ownership to do project work. And that really slows down our process of getting a project completed because typically we're adding multiple steps and agreements through those contracts trying to get all the funding in place. Large-scale forest management projects have lower administrative costs and lower cost per acre to complete. Larger scale projects tend to reduce cost per acre because there's a lower mobilization cost for equipment and consistent work due to the length of the projects. From our perspective, the funding will get critical management on the ground completed quicker. I thank you for your consideration of improving and increasing forest management in Wyoming's forests. I know there is quite a few folks here to testify on this bill, so I will stop here and stand for any questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Forrester Norris. Any questions for Forrester Norris? Representative Smith.
Thank you very much. I read a lot about forest management, and then on page 2, Romanet number 2, it talks about the reduction of risk of catastrophic wildfire damage. Is part of that management logging? And if so, how much logging across the state from the private sector do we have?
Forrester Norris.
Okay, Chairman, that is a great question. Yes, this does have to do with possibly logging and logging benefits. We do have quite a bit of that occurring across Wyoming. It's getting harder and harder to do in certain places on our federal lands. It's been decreasing over the years. On state and private lands in particular, we've been looking at expanding that because of the impacts around our communities specifically.
Further questions? Forrester Norris, I have one question for you on this 2.5, I'm sorry, I'm sure that's right. The $3 million, how did that figure be, how was that determined?
Chairman, that was brought by the bringer at the time, and this is Select Water Committee that brought it, and that is the number they brought forward. To give you an example, state trust preservation and enhancement funds. The state receives about $300,000 a biennium to manage state trust lands, clean up dumps, do forest health work on state trust lands. So we budget about $150,000. We match it with federal funds, so we'll get maybe $300,000 to do work on state trust lands for a biennium. Right now, we have work that's standing up to about $1 million worth of work on state trust land. So we'll get about that are ready to go, laid out and ready to go. So we will be able to, in the next 2 years, get maybe a third of that done.
Okay, all right. Any further questions? Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. You know, I am going to piggyback on the rep's conversation on this logging conversation. When I was a kid, we had this growing up in Platte County. Interestingly enough, I look at our mountains and I have no clue why we logged that mountain like we did, but we did. I mean, as a kid, it was a deal of you can't ride your bike on these certain roads because you're going to get hit by a logging truck. And because we had 2 sawmills and it was just a part of what we did. And I understand that probably every person behind you in the room, and we would all love to be able to fix this problem. But one of the things that I am going to push and say, let's have this conversation. First of all, this is needed, and I agree. But if we're not careful, we're going to really be a detriment to our forests if we don't try to start turning this around. And I think federally, we could see that happen this administration. So I would just challenge you, let's have those robust conversations as the legislature, as your department, those 2 branches saying, hey, let's get back into these forests and let's make old forests young forests again, and let's get them to a point where we're not dealing with the fires we're dealing with. So I think this is good. $3 million, you said about 1 year's worth. You have $1 million kind of in the pipeline right now, so you think $3 million is going to cover this?
Mr. Chairman, Representative, we will utilize however much money you give us. There is a plethora of work, and just so you're aware, when we surveyed our Rural Fire Association and the 23 counties and asked them from wildfire this summer, you know, what are our gaps? Their number 1 gap was fuels management and dealing with the fuels and in our communities, on our state lands. And I completely agree with you on the federal lands. And we are actually next week, the entire state of Region 2 and Region 4 are getting together in Laramie to talk about how we are going to change the ship and how much available timber there is with every forest soup in Wyoming. So, thank you.
Further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Please stay close by in case we have further questions. All right. So do we have any, no other legislators, any other elected officials to speak on this one? None that I see. All right. Please come forward, sir. Yeah, please come forward. We'd like to hear from you. Welcome to Appropriations, Mr. Commissioner. Please state your name, let us know which county you represent, and tell us your thoughts on this bill.
My name's Eric Sell from.
Yeah, right into the mic, please, just so, it's hard to
Okay.
hear in this room.
Eric South from Uena County, southwest corner. I'm a big proponent of this bill. I grew up in the timber industry my whole life. About 8 years ago, we had a fire, and the county has a youth camp that is in forested ground that we own, that we got years ago. My grandpa was instrumental in getting that, but we had a fire that we saved most of the youth camp, or they did, but it's, we have that problem with all the dead timber. And, there's a lot of private ground around it that got burnt, cabins got burnt. And so I can see the need to kind of clean up these areas, but a lot of times to find loggers or operators that are gonna go in there and clean it up, the stuff there's no value in it other maybe than firewood, so, and so it's an ongoing process, not just, with the federal stuff too. And this gentleman talked about the management of the forest. I call it mismanagement. For about 40 years now, they've looked at our forests, what's happened. But the operators have to have help too to log it. You almost have to pay them to come in and do it, rather than buy the sales, in my opinion. So I'm really a proponent of this bill. I think it'd be good. And as Kelly said, if you folks wanted to put more money in there, I'm sure we would accept it. But I appreciate your time.
You haven't read about this committee in the newspapers, I assume.
I guess not.
I appreciate the comments. Any questions for Commissioner South? All right, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, any public comment out here in the room before I go to online? Please come forward. Everybody come on forward. Plenty of chairs up here. If you're just not representing an association, but you want to speak on this, if you could line up. I'm going to go one of you, and then we'll go online, and then I'll come back. So, sir, we'll start with you since you got set down there. Please state your name and where you're from and how you feel about this bill.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate it. And committee members. My name is Steve Tizer. I'm a lifetime Laramie resident. I flew over here this morning in our weather conditions. I'm here today speaking as the owner of a family-operated third-generation business and on behalf of the Intermountain Forest Association, which is a member-based trade association representing forest products companies across the states of Wyoming, Colorado, South Dakota, and Nebraska. My company, Lodgepole Products, has been in business now for 50 years. And we manufacture fence posts for the ag industry, state and federal infrastructure projects, and as well, we create property fencing for rural and homeowners. I'm offering proponent testimony today for House Bill 101. I appreciate your time to hear this bill today and will stand for questions. The timing of this bill I find very beneficial. It will help address the multitude of issues impacting the forests of Wyoming. These include landscape resilience to ever-increasing wildfire danger due to drought and high fuel load conditions that we are all well too familiar with, protection of crucial watersheds both in production and water quality, post-fire restoration. These funds will also allow for projects that may have a component of low quality or non-merchantable product that would not be bid upon or sold otherwise. This funding adds to the adage of an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Point number one today, being a business owner that depends upon the timbered lands of Wyoming, which in our state are nearly all federally or state taken care of, and given my interactions with association members, a very brief report on the state of the industry sheds light on how beneficial this funding could be at this time. Despite the headwinds of rising costs and lower lumber prices, the single largest threat to industry remains to be supply. Industry is the only affordable tool to produce the landscape resiliency that I previously mentioned, and as we see closures of mills and longstanding businesses, we lose our ability to create a healthy landscape. From the major mills in Crook and Carbon counties to my post plant in Albany County and beyond, we struggle to find enough volume to run, and we have already seen closures. Post plants like mine also struggle to find raw material. For example, our family business in the last 5 years has only run 2 of those 5 at our capacity. And 2 of those years where we were down, we were under 50% capacity and had multiple times of layoffs and closures. While this grant allows for work in state lands, I believe the timing of these funds allow for a multiplier effect. I've seen the ability of Wyoming State Forestry, under the excellent direction of our state forester, to utilize tools like Good Neighbor Authority with the United States Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, Wyoming Game and Fish, and other partners to find greater opportunity, pace, and scale to projects that create the resilience that we need. These funds, while on state lands, may also benefit the greater health of the state as efficiencies in an area or a specific watershed may be targeted with these partnerships. Getting these funds on the ground will be very helpful as we look to additional solutions for federal funding. My final point, under the energy, and I use that term on purpose, of Wyoming State Forester, this funding will be utilized and compounded. At a recent IFA meeting with state and federal partners within Region 2, I asked the state foresters of Wyoming, Colorado, and South Dakota if they were underutilized by their federal partners. The response, including from Wyoming, emphatically stated that they were underutilized and that they had additional capacity. Simply put, the Wyoming State Forester, Kelly Norris, and her staff get work done on the ground. And I am confident that Wyoming State Forestry would be a great steward of this funding. Thank you for your support of HB 101.
Thank you, Mr. Kaiser. Questions for Mr. Kaiser? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So would you say the biggest hindrance for your business to grow and do better is funding or permitting?
Mr. Kaiser.
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. The biggest issue for us, honestly, comes from funding, because without the funding, there's no implementation of projects. For us, as a business, the larger issue is consistency. So it's very difficult as a business to know what investments to make, what equipment to purchase. And for the big mills, the biggest issue is you have a large investment in infrastructure and in human infrastructure, in your employees. And so as we see these closures, typically you don't see that infrastructure come back. So as being in this industry for a family industry now and being here for 50 years, it's hard as a business owner to wrap your head around the fact that we're struggling to get raw material, and this raw material needs to come off of the landscape. With more funding, especially with our state partners, which I mentioned, we see a lot of efficiency out of. It helps us a great deal to know it's a piece of the pie that helps us know that there will be added consistency as we move forward.
Thank you. Further questions? Thank you very much for being here, Mr. Kaiser.
Thank you.
Ms. Childress, if we could go to Ms. Kennedy online, please. And just so everybody knows, is there anyone else out in the crowd that wants to speak on this? If you could raise your hands. Okay. What I'm going to do, I should have said this earlier, but we're going to limit our time on this bill to 3 minutes per person. So if my vice chair could keep an eye on that, 3 minutes. So Ms. Kennedy, welcome to Appropriations. If you could keep your comments to 3 minutes, but we'd appreciate you introducing yourself and let us know your thoughts on this bill.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Holly Kennedy, and I'm here today representing the Wyoming Association of Conservation Districts. And we are, of course, standing in support of this bill. This is a great bill that I think will bring many benefits to our state. So first off, I might talk to just a little bit about the benefits of this grant funding. Something really important to note about anytime there's a grant funding available out there such as this is that it allows special districts to participate in the process. That includes conservation districts, of course, but also entities such as your local weed and pest. So it really helps to get monies into the hands of a skilled workforce that's already there, already in place, familiar with the lands in the community and the needs there, and helps get those monies onto the ground that much faster. Another benefit of doing a grant program such as this is it allows for match funding. So it allows this funding to be able to be paired with federal monies as well as private donations, which just stretches these monies so much further and allows so much more work to get done at essentially a cost savings to the state. As we all know, we can either invest monies into our forests now, or we're going to have to pay significantly much more money later on in the unfortunate case of a wildfire. And so to talk about that, some of the cost savings I think you'll see from the investment of this money and kind of the way it'll pay itself back, if you will, is in that reduction of wildfire fighting costs, of course, in protection of county infrastructure. We all know what happens in these situations a year later post-fire when we have flooding events and especially flash flooding events, and it washes out county roads, it washes out county culverts, things like this. And then, of course, it also presents the prime opportunity for invasive species to come in and settle in, which again carries a high burden of cost to go in and treat after the fact. It'll also help, as you heard earlier, protect some of those municipal water systems. You heard testimony about how, it really helped out in the Elk Fire, protect some of those municipal water systems and keep those in place. And of course, all of these things are a public good and something that benefits the public greatly as a whole. So with that said, you can see there's a lot of levels of support that we have for this bill. We think it'll do good work and get good work done on the ground. And speaking to Representative Haraldson's, supportive comment on the bill, if the committee decided to add more monies, we of course would be supportive of that action as well.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kennedy. Are there any questions for Ms. Kennedy? Right, seeing none, thank you very much for being here. We appreciate your time and
Thank you, Chairman.
input. All right. Sir, please introduce yourself and tell us your position on that.
Lance Dell. I'm an independent contractor with JL & Sons Logging. I've been logging for 50 years, 32 years in the Bighorn Mountains in District 5 of State Forestry. I'm a totally independent contractor. I don't work for any sawmills or anything. We do all of our own work and hauling and everything. I'm here to support this bill. This is a program that's not vital, but critical to forest management, especially in our area. Why? In my area, in the Bighorn Mountains, 60% of the timber stand is not logs, but small stuff, and it's tough to deal with. It's very old trees, way beyond maturity. Lots of disease, bugs, pine beetle, spruce budworm, mistletoe, rot, just really stagnant timber. And it's pretty much everywhere and little to no value as far as for us to have to deal with. The things I like about this bill is that it keeps control in the state forestry, because as was stated earlier, these folks know how to get it done, and I've been working with them for a long time, and when they tell you they're going to do something, they get it done. And they've probably averted a whole lot of catastrophes up there and some of the things they've done already. It also, what I like about it, it targets certain areas, and those certain areas connects the dots between projects that have been done already, ones that might be done in the future, or fire break, aspen enhancement stuff. You can target certain areas that need to be done rather than waiting for something else. It also can go after the wood of not very much value, but needs to be done anyway. It goes after the extremely diseased areas. You could do that and set those aside to be done. It could be used for state and private collaboration projects together. And on the Bighorns, a lot of the state land is actually landlocked inside private ranches. And so accesses as part of these projects are crucial. If there was a catastrophic wildfire, a wind, or we've had 3 tornadoes on the Bighorns in the last 5-6 years, it's still possible to target these areas and salvage. So in closing, I'd like to say, as it's been mentioned, the infrastructure in the logging industry is pretty much gone. Very few of us left to do the work. The mills that buy large volumes of product are gone or hundreds of miles away. So this is one more tool that we could have in the box that makes this a viable treatment project. And it's like the same old adage, you either pay me now or pay me later. So
Thank you, Mr. Lansel. Any questions? Mr. Lansel? Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate your input.
Thank you.
So, actually, I'm going to go back to online, and then I'll come back to you, sir. So, we had one more person online, actually, it's Ms. Clark. Could you bring Ms. Clark on, Ms. Childress? And the 2 gentlemen that were in the back, if you could come on forward. Is there anyone else that wants to testify on this? Okay.
Karen Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Karen Clark, and I represent the Wyoming Farm Bureau Federation. We sit in support of this bill as we feel the grant program will be a great assistance to Wyoming forested and neighboring non-forested landscapes in a myriad of ways. The first being the criteria for applying for grants that impact agriculture in the state. As our state forester mentioned earlier, as a headwaters state, Wyoming is situated with our greatest water resource coming from our forested lands, and we appreciate mechanisms like this grant program that aim to enhance water yield. Also, we support the additional grant funding for efforts like this to proactively manage our forested lands for reducing the risk of catastrophic wildfires. Wildfires don't follow ownership boundaries, so they can quickly impact private lands and communities, as we've all talked about already. So with that, we sit in support of this bill and the efforts to support forest health management here in the great state of Wyoming. Thank you, Mr. Chair, for the opportunity to join virtually. And again, we sit in support of this bill.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Any questions for Ms. Clark? Seeing none, we appreciate your being here and giving us your thoughts on this particular bill.
Thank
All
you.
right, sir, please.
Thank you, Chairman Bear. My name is Bruce Thornock. Oh, there we go. Is that better? Bruce Thornock. I'm a co-owner of South and Jones Timber and Blacks Fork Timber. We reside on the southwest corner of the state. As I've sat here, I appreciate each of you for taking up this bill. I've sat here and heard, I had a whole list of things I wanted to cover. It's been covered by all of these folks in detail. So I've been thinking, what can I add? We've also been in business since '43. Eric South, the commissioner who spoke earlier, he's a cousin. Just to let you know, he has a close tie. His dad and I were partners. And he still deals with the timber industry directly. But one thing I could add, this last 2 years has been about the roughest time I remember. I've done this all my life. I'm 56. We're dealing with high inflation on one hand, and caused by whoever caused it. We're dealing with Canadian timber that comes in and makes it so that I'm selling lumber today for lower prices than I did 10 years ago. And on the other side of that ball, I'm paying more for everything that I buy, including eggs. And you all know that. We also, as Kelly mentioned, the fire that you had on the east side of the state. I'm not familiar with this end of the state. I'll tell you about the other end of the state. We deal in the Uinta, Wasatch Cache Forest. We buy a lot of timber sales in that area. We also buy in the Bridger Teton in the middle of Wyoming. We have fire danger in both of those areas, and this last September, we had a fire start near one of our logging jobs. It burned up about $486,000 worth of our timber that we'd already put into decks. We just hadn't removed it from the mountain. Since then, I found out that insurance doesn't cover, my insurance won't cover the cost. Nobody else will. Nobody knows anything about where the money comes from. But the bigger problem was that the fire continued to burn for months. It burned through the path of our, the cells that we were about to move on. So it basically ruined our entire summer. One of the things that we deal with in our business is a very short timbering season. Okay, we have, and because the forest is open to so many, for so many things, which is wonderful, it inhibits our access to the forest. We can't go into the forest until mid-July, because that's when the three-toed woodpeckers and the birds and the goshawk and everything move out. So then we're allowed to enter. In August, it is the hottest season of the year in our part of the world. So then we just move into the forest, and now we're under a fire restriction because everything's so dead because of the beetles and all the things that have attacked our forests, and we have mismanaged. But, so what happened to us this year was we had nowhere to go, and all of our equipment was tied up for months. So we basically lost the entire year of logging. So it's been the worst year of my personal history. But what this bill will help me deal with in my business is it would help us, enable us to get more done in those short months that we have access to the forest. Because after December 15th, they want us out of there for the snowmobilers and everybody else to enjoy the forest, which I understand. Mm-hmm. But if you think about it, it's such a short season that would allow people like me and these others who've already spoken to just get more done for the forest, for our mills, and also help us cover some of the cost of all these losses that we're suffering through, no fault of any of ours. But that's, aside from everything I've heard, that's really all I can think of that's left uncovered. So I appreciate the time, Chairman Bear, and all you representatives. Appreciate each of you, everything you do.
All right, thank you, Mr. Thornott. Questions for Mr. Thornott? Representative Harold.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, and thank you for running a logging operation. Thank you. I know that there's a lot of other things you could be doing that'd probably be more lucrative with your time. But thank you for supporting and keeping this industry alive and active. As we do look forward, I know you guys are here talking about this bill, but also be thinking what we as the legislature could be doing for you guys above and beyond this. If there's something, I want to see logging to be a viable part of our industry again in Wyoming, and something that's going to bring financial stability back into a culture again. And I know you might be like, that's competition, but you probably also, as we hear people saying we're struggling to get material, we're struggling, let's help you guys open it up. So if there's anything we can do, keep that in mind, please. Even down the road where you're like, wait a second, they mentioned that. This is something we always hit, and this is a frustration, and that's something statutorily we could fix on the state level. Let us know. And nice ring, by the way.
I think there was a question in there somewhere. Mr. Thornott.
Thank you, Representative Haroldson. I appreciate that. We're in this business because we enjoy it, and we see the need. That ring came from hunting. I love every part of our forests, but it's sad to see our forest in the state they're in. We know about the dead timber, but when you enter the forest, like those of us who are loggers, and many of you don't see it, but these cells that we're buying are all fallen down. If you're a cattleman, you can't push your cows through some of these forests. It's not possible, so you go around. It's really a sad state of affairs, and I appreciate you saying that. And I'm sure there are things, and I'll put my mind to it, and if there are, I'll bring it to your attention. So appreciate your time.
Mr. Thornock, I have a question for you, but I'd rather us just take that offline. So if I could catch you after the meeting, I'd really appreciate just asking you a question about your industry. And thank you for being here. All right.
Thank you.
Gentlemen, we'll start with you on the left there. So please introduce yourself and tell us who you represent and how you feel about this bill.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, Committee. My name is Chris Coker. I'm the Worland Fire Chief and Washoe County Fire Warden. I'm here today representing the Wyoming Fire Chiefs Association and the Wyoming Rural Fire Association. The Wyoming Fire Response Organizations, day in and day out, are responsible for responding to fires on state lands. With that being said, we work with our state and federal partners. Forester Norvis does a great job with that. We work with grants such as the Western States Fire Grant that's administered through State Forestry, and CAFA grants, which are directly adjacent to Forest Service land on private lands. We work with our forest partners on opportunities in those areas, but very seldom do we have the opportunity to what this potentially brings to mitigate state land and give us some breathing room where we have opportunities to potentially slow or stop fire progression as fires such as the Elk Fire was spoke on, and other fires that we see in and year out. So with that aspect, this is, the fire service is certainly in support of this because it gives us a tool to help mitigate that. And certainly the reduction in cost through mitigation versus response is exponential. So thank you for your time. I'd stand for questions.
Thank you, Chief Coker. Any questions for the chief? All right, seeing none, thank you very much for being here, and we appreciate that input.
Thank you.
You, sir, please.
I'm Brent Godfrey. I'm the fire chief, Bighorn County Fire District Number 2 out of Basin. I'm also the Bighorn County Fire Warden. And I can't add too much more to what Chris said, other than on the west side of the Bighorn Mountains, we're starting to see all these people moving in and building cabins and homes and stuff. And we've got intermingled state, private, and state forest service land that if we were able to pick a state section or something where we can build a fire break and have some guys come in and log it or thin it so that we could hold fire lines during fires like we've had on the east side of the Bighorns, then everybody benefits from it. But like all the forests we got around us, the pine beetle kill from the shell side of things all the way down, all the timber that had been logged is now growing back threefold with no breaks, no nothing in it. It's just an overload fire danger. And I think this bill will help mitigate a lot of that problems in our area and any areas that have got intermingled state and federal lands, that we can build some breaks and do some work.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Gaffney. Questions for Chief Gaffney? All right. Thank you very much for being here. We appreciate you. All right. Representative Storer, did you want to opine on this particular bill at all? All right. Thank you. And I don't see any further. Ms. Childress, do we have anyone online? All right. We've dispatched with that. So we'll close public comment on House Bill 101. Committee, what's your pleasure? Move the bill do pass. Moved by Sherwood, seconded by Smith. All right, we'll start with page 1. Page 2. Page 3. Page 4. Page 5. All right. Any discussion on the bill? Seeing none, we'll take the roll. Ms. Childress.
Roll call vote, House Bill 101 do pass. Representative Allemand? Aye. Representative Angelos? Aye. Representative Harrelson?
Aye.
Representative Pendergraft?
Aye.
Representative Sherwood?
Aye.
Representative Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Bear?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, 7 aye.
All right, that do pass. And considering the passion that Representative Haroldson had for that, I'll ask you to manage that bill short of finding someone from Select Water to take that over. Will you handle that? All right. All right, thank you all very much on that bill. And now we'll move on to House Bill 292, which I'll present and turn the gavel over to my good Vice Chair Pendergraft.
Settle in, settle in. Welcome, Mr. Chairman, to Appropriations. Would you please bring us House Bill 292?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I bring you House Bill 292, Budget Reserves Recommended Appropriation Amount. So I have been discussing this particular issue on the floor to some extent, but this goes back to the statutes that are in place for the executive branch's recommended budget. And so we have statutes that put all kinds of restrictions on how that budget should be developed. It is a recommendation. We're the ones that actually create the budget. And this bill addresses some of those, one in particular of those issues of restriction on the executive and how they present that budget. In particular, this bill changes the determination that we want 5% to be the limit out of this account to 10% as far as leaving that amount in the account. And so this is a further restriction on how much we want the executive to profile towards the budget. So we're going to give ourselves more cash flow by moving to 10% and keeping that out of the governor's profile. So in other words, when he creates a budget, currently there's a limit. He has to leave 5% of the available funds that are forecasted by Craig available for expenditures. And if you recall, a lot of our revenue is brought in at the end of the year. And so what happens is if we don't have that 5% in there, we, in the middle of the year, run short of funds. And so we want to be able to pay our bills on time. This doubles that amount from 5% to 10%. So think of it this way, when you're creating your budget, you would leave 10% unexpended of your expected revenue. So if your paychecks that are coming in, you would say, I want to leave 10% on the table in case I have an emergency, in case I have some other unforeseen contingency. So in other words, as we talk about this particular budget that we're working on right now downstairs, it would be nice to have a little bit more of those general funds available for us in the event that we have a disaster like we've had this fire. And that's what this bill would do. It would provide more funding available midstream, if you will, like we're seeing right now. So with that, I'll walk you through the bill. You know, there's really just addressing this 9-2-1012. It brings it into the bill, and you can see on page 2, we strike 5%, and we change that to 10% on line 8 and 9. And then you'll notice on line 11, it starts on 10, it says from the general fund to the budget reserve account. So this takes funds and sets them aside on our secondary checking account to ensure that they stay there until we get to that point where we need those funds. And then we also address on page 3, 9-2-1013, and this, again, is changing from 5% to 10%. And this is just two different parts of statute where we address these limitations on the executive's recommendation for a budget. And with that, you know, we come to the effective date on page 5, and this is be effective immediately. Obviously, the next time we'd see it actually used would be late this year when the executive is developing his next budget. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, any questions? Representative Haroldson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Bear, thank you. As we look at this, do you have an idea of, like, in the last, I guess it'd be 4 cycles, that we've seen, how many times have we dipped into that, below that 10%, between that 10 and 5 line in the biennium budgets?
Mr. Chairman?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So this particular figure has been dipped into a couple of times, most recently in this particular supplemental budget. So a couple of times it has happened, and we really, there's no teeth in this particular statute, and the reason is there's there's an issue with Article 4, Section 4 of our Constitution, separation of powers, giving the executive, a lot of latitude. But since this state relies on the executive working year-round with his departments and his agencies to develop or first go at the budget, rather than this committee creating a budget all on its own. And by the way, we're a part-time legislature, so that's one of the main reasons we don't do that. That's the reason we give deference. Whenever we vote on the budget, each item is a aye vote to go along with the executive, a no vote to reject the executive. And so because of that, there's really no teeth in this, but it is something that, we want that guideline. And so there are certain guidelines, and we'd like to see the executive follow those guidelines. This also makes the guidelines a little stricter, if you will, just for our cash flow purposes. Hopefully that answered your question, Representative Haroldson.
Follow up? Okay, I had a follow-up, I guess. You mentioned, Mr. Chairman, that there were no teeth. Do you really think, considering the directives, intended targets, that teeth are necessary?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. I do not. I don't think it's appropriate either, because we do want to honor the fact that our executive does do the work of creating that budget. We just want, as a body, when we're making the decisions, to have him also honor our requests to keep the budget within some guidelines.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that clarification. Any further questions? Seeing none, we'll reach out. Are there any legislators in the room who would care to opine? Seeing none who cares to opine, let's move on to agencies. Any agencies would like to speak on this topic? Okay, seeing none, is there anyone in the room from the public who would like to comment on this? Still seeing none. Ms. Childers, is there anyone online?
No, Mr. Vice Chair.
Last call. Anyone have a comment? No further questions. Let's pull this bill back behind the dais then. Committee, what's your pleasure? Who made the motion? Moved by Representative Scott Smith. Seconded by Representative Angelos. Let's walk through the bill. Any comments, amendments, page 1? Page 2. 3. Page 4. Finally, page 5. Any final discussion on the bill? Seeing none, let's take this to a vote. Ms. Childers?
Roll call vote, House Bill 292 do pass. Representative Alaman? Aye. Representative Angelos? Aye. Representative Haroldson?
Aye.
Representative Pendergraft?
Aye.
Representative Sherwood?
No.
Representative Smith?
Aye.
Chairman Bear?
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, 6 aye, 1 no.
Thank you, Ms. Childress. House Bill 292 is passed committee.
I'll manage that on the floor. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And Representative Storer, would you please come forward and and present to us House Bill 320.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name's Liz Storer. I'm representative from House District 23 in Teton County. This is actually the first bill that I've ever sponsored that I brought to committee. And so bear with me, please.
Well, Representative Storer, we are honored to be your first committee that you present to.
Thank you. So this bill really came about a couple of weeks ago as I was really thinking about where we were at as a body and some of the bills that we've been debating. And as you all know, I've been a member of the Revenue Committee for both the 67th and this session. And so we've seen a lot of bills come through dealing with property tax and sales tax, mostly reducing revenues. And so it just occurred to me that we are at a crossroads. Clearly, there's interest in fundamentally changing our tax policy in the state. But exactly what that means for everybody involved is pretty fuzzy at this point in time, I think. So, 40 years ago, almost 40 years ago, the citizens of the state voted to rely on property tax as the source for schools and local governments and special districts. And that has been a very reliable source of revenues for those entities. Now we have this plethora of bills coming our way, and it's really unclear, I think, what direction we're going in exactly. That there's just a lot of concerns coming from our stakeholders. We heard just yesterday, and the body at the other end of the building had a discussion on one of the bills. And there were just, in reading the reports, there was just a lot of different perspectives expressed about what direction to go in. Do we backfill? Do we not backfill? Is this 25 or 50? Or, what are we really trying to do here? And I've certainly heard a lot of concerns from a number of different entities about, what this new normal means. We have fiscal notes on individual bills, but if you look at them cumulatively, it's pretty hard to know what that impact is. And that does have a lot of our constituents concerned. It has a lot of our school boards and local governments, are expressing a lot of concern. But and I think it's really hard for them to understand what we're trying to do. So the idea behind this bill was really to create a roadmap that really does include all the stakeholders and tries to help us figure out what direction we're going in. This is not a new idea. There was a bill presented in 2018 to this body. It was not considered, but I think I would like to think that had that bill been considered, we might have a better sense of what direction we're going in at this point in time. Wyoming's still a big rural state with a small population. We are blessed by the minerals and other wealth we find, but I think our communities still struggle to build prosperous communities and be places that people want to live. And in some ways, I think that's all we need to do in the state of Wyoming is build places that people can and want to live and have a reasonable tax policy that supports that. And if we do that, we will have succeeded. But I feel like it's not clear where we're going in the direction for the latter piece of that. So as you just said, Mr. Chairman, unknowns exist in the future. And so having some understanding of what direction we're going and bringing the stakeholders into that conversation over the next couple of years, I think would be really valid. So that's what this is about. Thank you.
Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Welcome, Representative Storer. Thank you for bringing this. This is something that has been in the back of my mind for some time. As the funding landscape in Wyoming changes, we need to perhaps reconsider how we fund the things that we have to do. And having run a bill the last couple of years that was calling for a new standing committee, one of the things I prepared myself for was perhaps reviewing the existing ones, and are any of those feasibly to go away, looking at other task forces. And so, of course, this leads me to my question. Did you consider, or have you looked at the list of existing task forces and special commissions and seen maybe any of those that you think might be able to pare away to make room for this one so that we're not actually expanding government?
Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. I have not. This seemed to be a particularly important issue, and there may be a way to fold that in, but I think it's a modest appropriation. Again, kind of modeled, we did this actually back in 2000, if you were around then, and it was really helpful, and there's still some lessons I think we can learn from that process.
Further questions for the bringer? Representative Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Storr, on page 3, line 10, line 7, section F, one member representing the constitutional expertise. What's your envisionment of that? And then, can I ask 2 questions in one? Then on line 12, would you be amenable to allowing the Senate President and the Speaker choose the 2 co-chairs?
Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Smith. These were just kind of a starting place in terms of what the membership should be. I hope to have that kind of conversation with the body, should you move this forward. I think the governor does have a lot of power here, and that might be something we could adjust as well. I think the constitutional piece was, again, at least having a review of what the cases have been in front of the Supreme Court to understand the issues that do exist. I know we're still debating those on the floor of the House today, and we probably will continue to do that, but at least educating all of us on what those issues have been and what's been most important, I think made sense. It's worth noting that our current U.S. Senator representing Wyoming was a longtime member of this body and was a strong proponent for fair market value when developing the property tax system that we currently have. So I think we can also learn from our colleagues who have been before us, and have some history to help us think about what direction we're going.
Further questions for the bringer? Representative Harrelson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Good job. You presented a bill well. So 14 members is what I'm counting, correct? Okay, and then the governor shall appoint co-chairs for the task force on page 3, line 12 and 13. Would that be 2 more, or out of the pre-existing 2 senators, 2 representatives, that you would pick a chairman out of those? Just trying to get my head wrapped around the size of the committee.
Representative Storr.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Harrelson. I think 14 would be the total, and out of those 14, the governor would pick 2 co-chairs.
Further questions for the bringer? Representative Storr, I have a couple of questions and comments. I appreciate this idea as well. I think this is really, it's time for something along these lines. I'm not sure I would approach it the same way, but I like seeing that you're looking for a solution for this problem. First question I would have is on the representative, on page 2, line 4, representing revenue and taxation expertise. From your time on the Revenue Committee, would you believe that maybe a member of the Board of Equalization would be a good person to address that, since they do also have a great understanding, in my opinion anyway, of that constitutional issue that your constitutional expert would bring to the table as well? Would you agree with that?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. I will admit that the former chair of the Board of Equalization, Jane Mockler, has been a dear friend since she served in the Senate, and I did ask her for some input into this. And I think whether it's a former member or, the question of a current member, whether they would feel comfortable doing that, remains to be seen. But I think certainly their perspective and understanding how difficult it has. I'm, for better or worse, I'm old enough to have been around this building for over 3 decades now. And I've met a lot of folks, and I know a lot of folks who were part of those debates and battles in the late 80s over property tax, and who were litigants in that case, both on education and on minerals. And it takes a long time. It is a lot easier to create, as I know you know, a tax break than it is to put a tax in front. So I do think we might want to move a little more slowly when it comes to tax reform, and recognize that it took 20 years to come up with a plan that actually made sense for the mineral industry, so that they weren't just dictating to the state what they were going to pay. And it took a lot of time in court to decide how we were going to pay for schools. So those debates continue with us today, but they are things that I think learning from the past would help us at least think about what direction we want to go in the future.
So you had brought up, some work that was done in the 2000s, but you just brought up 1988, or at least the late 80s, and you mentioned your familiarity with that. Do you recall at all in that time frame, was a similar effort made in the late 80s as you're mentioning in the 2000s?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe that was mostly related to litigation, that, the state got taken to court. And as a result, the legislature was told that the system that the state was using for assessing property tax especially was not constitutional. And so then the legislature came up with the system we now have, until just with Amendment A, of the 3 different classes. And that was put in front of the voters of the state in 1988 and passed. And that is the system we've been having since that time, my understanding.
My last comment has to do with your comment that we are basically a ship without a rudder right now in this regard. And I do believe that, if we're going to do it right, I think that the executive is probably the appropriate place for real leadership in this issue. And I think that's probably what happened in the 80s and the 2000s. And I hope that we can come to that conclusion. I hope you'll join me in trying to get that kind of leadership out of the executive for this effort. And that's an office that's year-round. Us legislators are, we're part-time, but at the same time, we're just as passionate as the executive would be. But I think that leadership coming from that office could play a big role in exactly what you're trying to do right here. And I just want to finish with that comment. But again, I appreciate you bringing the bill, and look forward to some debate about it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would agree. I think the current chief executive has been less enamored of task forces than ones from the past. I think some have been more successful than others, certainly. I served on a task force on state trust lands in the I don't know, kind of late 90s, I think. And I read what we came up with, and some of that's still kind of waiting to be implemented. So it takes both parts of the government, I think, to your point, to have that kind of leadership. And I will certainly encourage, as I can, the chief executive to at least consider this, and have been talking already to their office. So
very good, very good. Thank you. Any further questions for the bringer? Thank you for bringing the bill, and stay close. And do I have anyone else here that would like to opine on House Bill 320? All right. Please come forward. Ms. Childress, I assume we have no one online on this bill, okay? Please turn the mic on. I'll start with you, sir, since you got sat down first. Please state your name and who you represent and what your thoughts are on 320.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and
We'll
good
get some people
afternoon.
lined up, so I'm going to tell you, we've got to be downstairs in 20 minutes, so I'll give everybody 2 minutes to speak on this, if you could.
Well, you'll
please.
appreciate the brevity of my remarks. I'm Matt Hall with the Wyoming Association of Municipalities. Like many, I think we're just trying to wrap our minds around all these new changes that are coming down the pipe. And we certainly support this effort to take a deep dive into our tax structure. I think it's good and we support the bill. And with that, I'd stand for questions.
Thank you for that brevity. Any questions for Mr. Hall? All right, we appreciate that input. Go ahead, sir.
Mr. Chairman, members of the Appropriations Committee, Hank Oversland with the Wyoming Taxpayers Association. For those of you who do not know, we are an advocacy organization and education organization that promotes sound tax policy for a healthy Wyoming economy. We're honored to be here in support of Representative Storer of House Bill 320. We think that since Tax Reform 2000, there's been many changes and many changes have been proposed for property taxes, sales taxes this session. And so we think now is a good time to be studying this issue in consultation, as Mr. Chairman stated, with the executive branch, the legislative branch, and members of the public who this will affect. If I may, Tax Reform 2000 found that the state's tax structure lacks equity, stability, and balance. And that's kind of where the Taxpayers Association came in, and we support tax policies that are just, equitable, stable, and transparent. So we think that there have been changes made in response to Tax Reform 2000, but we think that it needs to continue to be looked at, and that this is a good thing to do. This is where the rubber hits the road when tax reform has been talked about so many times in revenue committees and on the floor, and I think that this would be a good vehicle to do that. So we stand in support of this, and just quickly, Mr. Chairman, to respond to the Vice Chair, this $126,000 we think is an efficient use of funds. In 2000 or in the late 90s, when Tax Reform 2000 committee was meeting, they had a $200,000 appropriation and used about $130,000 worth of that, according to the executive report. So we think that this is an efficient use, and it's not growing government. It's a 2-year task force that we think is well worth it. So, Mr. Chairman, with that, I'll stand for any questions.
Any questions for Mr. Halverson? I have a question for you. So you said you felt like this would be an efficient use of funds, and you heard the conversation between the good bringer of the bill and myself about leadership. I guess I would question the efficiency of a board if we don't have some passion from our executive to lead this effort. What are your thoughts on that comment?
Mr. Chairman, yeah, we think that this has to be, as I noted, a collaborative task force that works between the executive, the legislative branch, and members of the public, like I said. So I think we would be in support of that and working with them to do that. And where I would say we don't take a stance if the membership changes a bit or however you decide to do that. We just think that having something that's dedicated to looking at our tax structure, and if you added the state taxes in there or different things, we would be fully in support of that and work with whoever takes that up. And we'd be happy to.
Thank you. I will just make a statement here. I think that there are members of the legislature that are passionate, including the bringer of the bill, that are passionate. I hope we can get a lot more passionate people on this particular subject. So thank you. Mr. Brown, thank you for being here.
Mr. Chairman,
I guess I probably should say Dr. Brown, shouldn't I?
I've been called a lot of things, and it doesn't
Okay.
matter. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you for allowing us to have the opportunity to testify on the bill. My name is Boyd Brown. I'm the executive director for the Wyoming Association of Superintendents. Looking at the bill, I kind of see this as something that's fairly similar to what the Craig report is, but only for tax reform. This would inform the legislature with great data to improve policy decisions. I think it gives stakeholders the opportunity to have input and to provide guidance, and it also will allow us to have transparency, accountability, and evaluation of the policy work that you guys are doing. So we support the bill, and probably more the concept than the bill. I think there's a lot of things to talk about. To your question, I think if we want the executive branch to be very involved. I think you get them involved by maybe allowing them or making them select the chairs, and maybe that could backfire a little bit as well. But I think the opportunity for them to be involved through however we want them to be involved would be very positive. And with that, I would answer any questions.
Any questions for Dr. Brown? Seeing none, thank you very much for being here. Appreciate the input. You, sir, please share your name and who you represent.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Nick Bellack. I'm from the Wyoming School Boards Association, and we stand in favor of this bill. I would really kind of like to talk about this past weekend. We had our legislative forum with over 120 members representing many of the districts around Wyoming. As we talked about many of the bills, there was a lot of anxiety that happened around the bills because of exactly what we're talking about here. What does this mean for the future? And I think a mechanism like this bill could really ease a lot of that, especially for our districts that are planning for future and really relying upon having a good future outlook for their planning needs. So I'll be very brief and echo what everybody else has said here and stand for any questions. Thank you for letting me testify.
All right, any questions for Mr. Bellack? All right, seeing none, thank you very much. We appreciate your input. Okay, anyone else in the room? And we already covered online, so seeing none, we'll close public comment. Committee, what's your pleasure? Okay, move to pass by Sherwood, seconded by Pendergraph, and we'll start discussion on the bill. Page 1, page 2. Representative Pendergraph? Oh, page 3, Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just kind of to test the waters here, looking at line 12, I would move an amendment which would strike the word governor and insert task force, strike the word appoint and insert the word elect. After the word co-chairs, insert from among the members selected in A through G above.
You've heard the motion. Do I have a second? Seconded by Smith. Any discussion on the motion? Representative Haroldson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Real quick, just to clarify, so you're saying the body itself, these 14 individuals would select their co-chairs?
Representative Pendergraft.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It was mentioned in discussion that the executive had a substantial amount of weight in staffing this. And then I think because of the quality of the people that would be selected, it might be respectful of us to allow them to determine their own co-chairs.
Okay. Any further discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor of Representative Pendergraft's motion, say aye. Aye. All those opposed, no. Okay, that carries. Ms. Childress, did you catch all that? Got it clear? Okay, thank you. Any others, discussion or motions on page 3? Page 4. Page 5. Page 6. Page 7. Any discussion on the bill? Representative Alaman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've thought a lot about whether I'm a yes or no on this. I think I'm going to be a yes, just so that we can take it to the floor and really have it discussed. Thank you.
Okay. Further discussion? Representative Angelos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I think I'm going to echo the representative's statement that I don't know if I'm a yes or a no, but I'd like to hear the body. I think this is something the body should vote on, and I'll make my decision after we've gone through all the debate. Thank you for bringing it.
Further discussion on the bill? Seeing none, Ms. Childress, would you please take the roll?
Roll call vote, House Bill 320 do pass with amendments. Representative Alaman? Aye. Representative Angelos? Aye. Representative Haroldson?
Aye.
Representative Pendergraft,
Aye.
Representative Sherwood,
Aye.
Representative Smith,
No.
Chairman Bear.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, 6 aye, 1 no.
Okay, Representative Storr, would you please plan on managing this on the floor? All right, thank you. And congratulations on your first bill in front of committee. All right, we are adjourned, and thank you all for being here today.